It's my immense pleasure to now introduce our next conversation. Please give a very, very warm welcome to Rem Koolhaas and Okwui Enwezor. From the very beginning, when we planned this marathon, we thought it would be the most wonderful thing if we could have a dialogue here and actually gathering, bring together Rem, discussing his Biennale, and having Okwui, who will curate the next Art Biennale. So maybe we could start with Okwui. Okwui, the other night when we discussed the Biennale, you had such an interesting interpretation of Rem's Biennale, and maybe that could be a departure point. Then we could listen to Rem, who will tell us a little bit about the complex kind of endeavor to make such a Biennale, and then have a conversation.
Thank you so much, Hans-Ulrich. First and foremost, I don't really remember what I said to you at dinner, particularly if the conversation had been lubricated by a few glasses of alcohol. Nevertheless, I think it strikes me. There are two things I want to sort of to foreground. One is the nature of the entrance of the Biennale, and second, the meaning that I derive from the entire International Pavilion. We all come to Venice all the time, and we all visit the exhibitions in the International Pavilion, the former Italian Pavilion, the former Central Pavilion. And it seems to me that the entrance is the beginning of the defeat of many curators, that how to deal with that threshold, how to organize a reading of the exhibition in a way that actually addresses not only the philosophy and the concept of the exhibition, but also the experience of the exhibition in terms of its content. And I was really quite surprised when I came into the International Pavilion. It's not my belief that Rem has made an exhibition about architecture. I believe he's made an exhibition about a crisis of architecture. And what we are witnessing, or what I believe that I saw, was a patient on the table sliced open. And
was this the
a patient on the table sliced open, and in order to sort of give us a sense of the components and of what the reading of the building might be. And I think this incredible, in my sense, anthropomorphization of the exhibition is really a very interesting new logic that I've not actually seen an exhibition perform, that the exhibition itself, not as a sum of its parts, but as, in a sense, as an object. So really the exhibition itself seems to me to be an object, and the narrative of the entire thing proceeds from that logic. And I think this is something that makes the exhibition quite brilliant, quite interesting to read, this notion of the anthropomorphic nature of a building, which is kind of an inanimate thing. But when you come in and sort of look at that slice, that reveals all the stuff that is underneath the ceiling. In a sense, you're really looking at the anatomy of the crisis of architecture, and how this, crisis has been addressed, through different relationships to technology and so on. I don't quite know that if this is possible to be done with an art exhibition, and so I take this, my one fear about it is that this might spawn many copycats, where, it's not quite an easy thing to do. And I think, this is my immediate response to the exhibition, and perhaps it's a complete misreading or misapprehension of Rem's intention. But there you have it.
Thank you.
That's perfect.
I would like to not necessarily respond, but to maybe explain a few things about this Biennale. I was really very surprised at the moment that I made two conditions to become the director. that those conditions were accepted almost without any kind of resistance. I asked one more year of time, and everyone had told that was impossible. And the second condition was that I insisted on cutting off all connections with the contemporary world. And even that condition was immediately accepted. What that means for me is that the Venice Biennale is a kind of fortunate situation. It was the first Biennale. It is very proud of that status, but it is also deeply aware that the whole idea of the Biennale has been kind of debased through its very distribution, and that the model is almost becoming kind of meaningless. So I think what is interesting is that in Venice there is an appetite to reinvent the model of the Biennale, and maybe more than an appetite, a kind of really a sense that for the survival of the whole notion of a Biennale, it's crucial to reinvent it. So that is one thing, the fact that we met no resistance. The other thing is to kind of suggest and to tell Okwui also that everything that the Biennale says is impossible, to ignore it. Because the Biennale is extremely vocal and aggressive in terms of this will never work, that will never work, this can never work, this, nobody will believe that. And the main issue that the Biennale was kind of warning me against, and they're still warning me against it, is to give up any hope that it would be possible to ask individual pavilions, individual nations to contribute to the telling of a kind of single cumulative story, as they have in absorbing modernity. So, when I first met the representatives of the nations, I was kind of really incredibly tense because I thought I was going to launch an idea that would be bound to fail. But actually what I felt was a sense of relief that somebody finally offered them a kind of direction perhaps, or the perspective of contributing to a larger whole. And what I didn't know before I became director of the Biennale is that actually most of the content of the Biennale is defined by the ministries of foreign affairs of the individual countries. In other words, the content of the Biennale is ultimately defined on the level of diplomacy. And of course, these ministries choose curators, but it is a highly political entity. And for that reason, the notion of talking about absorbing modernity found an immediate resonance with this political level, and that resonance, I think, is kind of reinforced by the Biennale as a whole. So please ignore everything they say in terms of what you cannot do.
Now another thing you changed, which hasn't actually been, done. It's been kind of a thing, an unrealized thing, I think, for a long time, is that it's suddenly the different disciplines could come together. That basically there wouldn't be anymore so much a separation between the Biennale of Art and the Biennale of Architecture and the Dance Biennale and so on. And that's something which happens obviously particularly strongly through this invention in the Arsenale of injecting these spaces which will be used for the Dance Biennial. So was that another thing which at the beginning was considered to be impossible?
No, that is where I have to give the Biennale really credit. Boratta is kind of really conscious, as I said, that the format has to be reinvented. And it came from him, the idea to extend the Biennale from 3 to 6 months. So I think that in his eyes, the Biennale is on its way to become a permanent condition, which may be very smart, and that therefore its content is not necessarily to kind of present the latest news or the latest development, but actually to create the basis for the Biennale as a kind of educational or research-based institution. And if you see the enormous scale of the educational dimension and the enormous scale of the activities that the Biennale itself has helped to organize, you see that there is not an appetite for change, but also the possibility of implementing quite revolutionary combinations that we haven't experimented with for a long time. And I think that one of the ironic situations is that the notion of experiment, of course, is dubious because so many things that don't deserve it are called an experiment. On the other hand, there is a lot of moaning that experimentation is not possible. But here you find a kind of situation which is ready and actually demanding reinvention, and therefore, just as the nations didn't find it difficult to say yes, the fact that we proposed to the other biennales to become part of it, and the reason was that I simply felt that architecture did not deserve such a colossal territory on its own, because it is currently not capable of providing the contents on its own. Yeah. I pleaded from a position of weakness and not from a position of kind of strength, and that the weakness is always very sympathetic, and therefore everybody was keen to help me.
Now, okay, I wanted to ask you, because actually when Rem and I met for the first time, was when we worked on Cities on the Move. I remember always we did this exhibition and Rem said we should stop this tabula rasa thing, because obviously with exhibitions we always start again from scratch. I mean, it's this idea, even in a museum very often, and with the Biennale even more so, because there are these gaps in between, everything is demolished and it starts again from zero. And Rem said we should maybe think how actually exhibitions, can react to each other in a more interwoven way. And is there anything in the Biennale of Rem you saw where you think there could be a continuum, so that, or will it be a tabula rasa?
Well, I don't think that that it's possible to think of any Biennale as a tabula rasa in a sense. Even when you feel like you're starting from the beginning, I think that the object lesson of Rem's Biennale is this, bringing together of the constellation of disciplines in one space in the Arsenale, especially, because the Arsenale is a very narrative, kind of structure in terms of its elongation, the way you move from one space to another. So that already gives a very clear sign that it's not about the heavy amateur of architecture, but about the relationship between the space of the exhibition and the time of the exhibition. And how do you inhabit both? I think this is a very, very interesting, difficult thing to do in an exhibition, and to propose that as a way to sort of break down in fact, to get rid of interdisciplinarity as a thought, but really just simply to collapse the relationship between all the disciplines that are already very much constituted within the history and the body of the Biennale is something that is really terrific. The other thing I believe is how do you make a Biennale of Architecture, especially, in the context of the Arsenale, where architecture becomes lived, in a sense. Architecture becomes, the performers, the sounds, and so on. So this kind of points us to very different, resonances about architecture. So there are always shadows of previous projects already embedded in the fabric of each space. So I think there will be, of course, both a continuity and a sort of response, to Rem's, Biennale. I don't know. I'm still, working out my own principles and so on. But there may be the possibility of an inversion, in this sense.
Now, another thing to talk a little bit more about the rule of the games and all of that of Rem of your Biennale is when we walked through it the other day and you gave us sort of tours, on different days, and little by little we saw more of the show. There was a couple of rules of the game which I thought were very fascinating. One of it is that almost in every room here in the central pavilion there is a forgotten figure somehow. I mean, if it's the man of the stairways who worked for 5 decades or more than 5 decades on all this stairway research, or if it's Claude Parent's Oblique, in almost every room, yet at the same time every room also projects into the future. Can you maybe talk a little bit about this?
Well, I think that the main thing of the main ambition is very close to what Okwui was saying, an autopsy of architecture. And I wanted to show not only how nations modernize, but also how the profession of architecture is modernizing in terms of the modifications to each element over time. What is interesting is that we have seen a first wave of change where strictly architectural elements become invaded by mechanical devices, and we are now at the second moment of modification and maybe a revolution, where more and more of the elements are actually invaded by digital devices and by digital regimes. And I think that neither one of these revolutions has actually entered the real consciousness of architecture. We're still in the kind of mode of architecture is about composition, about aesthetics, about proportion, and we ignore, or the most contemporary part of architecture is actually the most unconscious part of architecture. So what I think is particularly sinister or particularly questionable about the second revolution I talk about, where there's an intersection with the digital world, is that all of that is purely profit-driven, and that architecture very clearly is now showing the signs of 30 years of belief in the market economy. 30 years where the main initiative is shifting from public values to private values. And each architectural element is kind of really showing the effects of that. More and more of the elements are serving to create individual perfection, individual comfort, individual kind of environments, and fewer of the elements are capable of articulating what a collective is. The collective almost seems to kind of things an element of the past. And one, for me, even completely surprising effect of the simply cutting off the connections with the current was the fact that the market per se is completely absent in this Biennale. And maybe that is for me the greatest satisfaction. It is marked in the size of the boats that are moored on the quayside, the quantity of boats. Everything is kind of reduced to kind of more humane proportions. And it used to be when you entered these days of the Biennale that half of the public were people you were greatly interested in meeting, and the other half were people you were interested greatly in avoiding. Basically, that part seems to have sensed that it was better to stay away.
Yeah.
And Okwui, how do you see that in relation to the art biennale, this idea what Rem described about the absence in his biennale of the market? It's kind of interesting, you know, looking at, doing this research, 89 plus, with Simon Castro, we're mapping lots of artists born in 89 and younger, and looking at all these, looking at all these, you know, artists over the last couple of months. One thing which is so fascinating is the incredible return there is in the art world to poetry, and how many artists actually connect to that, because that stands obviously completely outside the market. How do you see Rem's point?
Well, maybe Rem can get away with this. Maybe Rem can get away with this, and you know, Rem will dash. Maybe Rem, yeah.
Thank you very much. Rem, thank you so much.
Maybe Rem can get away with that, but I think that I'm not so sure that the market is necessarily the biggest challenge that the art world faces. And I'm not going to make a fetish of the market or a fetish of denying the market or not responding to the market. I don't think that would be necessarily a very intelligent way to approach the Biennale. But one thing I want to say, though, I want to return to this question of the layers of history that remain in the Biennale. And I think that it's very striking that Rem's Biennale in many ways actually recalls the 2003 Venice Biennale by Francesco Bonami in many ways. I think there are really resonances that run across some of the projects, particularly with your own project, Utopia Station, and the project of Wuhan Ru, Zones of Urgency. And so it's a reminder to all of us that the Art Biennale has had also this incredible moment of really very, very strong propositions, and it's important that we don't develop an amnesia of some of these, you know, possible places where interesting confluence of propositions, positions, and curatorial, programs have come together. So I'm looking at all of these themes. I think that the 2003 Venice Biennale marked the conclusion of a particular work of a generation of art, of curators. If 1993 really marked the emergence of a generation of artists, 2003 was a kind of conclusion of the work of a generation of curators, of which you were one.
No, it's great to mention Francesco Bonami, because I think also when I was actually, it's not only the pavilion but also in the central pavilion, almost each room is a collaboration with either another curator, Rem with another curator, with another institution, or also with different universities, MIT, and so on and so on. So there is this similar kind of polyphony which there was in the Bonami Biennale. Maybe a last question, Okwui, to address, to kind of bring it back to the Fan Palace and bring it back. There was earlier today a conversation connecting to the Haus der Kunst. You're the director of the Haus der Kunst. Chris Dercon was here with Herzog de Meuron discussing preservation. And we discussed this whole paradox of how an institution can actually be time storage yet also be a laboratory, and talked about this idea of, obviously Cedric's Fan Palace was the idea of kind of creating it ex nihilo, but can there be such a thing as a Fan Palace in a found situation? So Herzog de Meuron presented also their project for the armory. I was just wondering to hear, maybe it'd be great to hear a few of your thoughts about Cedric, about the Fan Palace, and can the Haus der Kunst be a Fan Palace?
Well, I think the great thing is that the Fan Palace, Cedric Price's Fan Palace remains a proposition, and it's a great thing. I don't know if Haus der Kunst can be a Fan Palace, given its very lugubrious nature. And in that sense, I think the thing we always fight in museums is what I call museum fatigue. And given the scale of the building itself, I think a bit of fun should be had in it.
It could not be a better conclusion. Okwui, thank you so very, very much. Thank you.